This story begins on the planet Krypton. A woman named Lara is giving birth, and Jor-El, her husband, assists her in the delivery. Jor-El is Krypton's greatest scientist, and now he presents himself before the High Council, the planet's rulers. It turns out they were in an energy crisis, and since they didn't want to search for another world to live in, they decided to extract energy from Krypton's core. This destabilized the core and made it unstable. And now, they only have a few weeks left before everyone dies. Jor-El had warned them, but the council didn't listen to him. He states that if they give him the Codex, he can guarantee the survival of the Kryptonian race. However, there's no time for scientific deliberations, because General Zod arrives, using his military power to carry out a coup and assassinate one of the council members. Zod declares that this council led Krypton to ruin, and so now he will make the decisions. The general asks Jor-El to join him, and together they can start over, eliminating the impure bloodlines that ruined their planet. However, Jor-El refuses, and states that he has become a tyrant. So Zod orders his arrest. While being transported to his cell, Jor-El is helped by a trusted robot, which launches a blinding device against the soldiers. It turns out the scientist possesses considerable combat skills, eliminating his captors. He makes a video call to Lara and says, "Darling, you must prepare the launch. I'm on my way." In the midst of a civil war, Jor-El summons his trusted insect dragon and crosses the skies in epic fashion. He arrives at a Genesis chamber, the place where all babies are artificially gestated. Since on Krypton, natural births are forbidden. By having a child naturally, Lara and Jor-El violated the law. Jor-El obtains the Codex, an artifact that contains all the knowledge and genetic material of their race. The military tries to take it, but his insect dragon arrives to the rescue. Back at home, Jor-El prepares the Codex and asks his wife if she found the right planet. Lara confirms. They found an ideal planet orbiting a yellow sun. They're referring, of course, to planet Earth. The yellow sun's radiation will make their baby extremely powerful. Lara fears their son will be marginalized or attacked by the local inhabitants, but Jor-El states they won't be able to hurt him. Because with such power, their son will be like a god to them. Likewise, Lara doesn't want to separate from her newborn baby, and sadness invades her, but her husband says they must act quickly. He dissolves the Codex and hides it within the little one's DNA. Additionally, Jor-El creates a small key with his family's insignia and places it with the baby. The parents say goodbye to their son and prepare a small ship for his escape. Jor-El puts on armor and receives Zod and his forces. The general asks his old rival what he did with the Codex, and Jor-El responds that he gave the Kryptonian race a new opportunity. He and his wife had the first naturally conceived baby in several centuries, and he will be free to choose his own destiny. However, Zod becomes furious, stating this is blasphemy. Jor-El eliminates his henchmen and fights Zod hand-to-hand, causing him an enormous wound to his face. Jor-El demonstrates impressive combat skills. Zod is defeated and Lara orders the launch of their son's ship. Zod, taken by rage, draws a blade and stabs Jor-El. Lara runs toward her dying husband, and Zod asks where they sent the child. Lara responds that his name is Kal-El, and he's beyond his reach. Zod returns with his men and orders them to shoot down that ship. However, just when the pursuit was about to begin, law enforcement forces arrive to stop the general's coup, and everyone is arrested. Zod is tried for murder and high treason. He and his followers are sentenced to 300 cycles in prison. He shouts that they're cowards for not executing them, and declares to Lara that he will find her son. The rebel military are frozen and placed in capsules, which are sent to a ship, which is sent to another dimension. Days later, Lara watches as the planet's core finally implodes. Her deceased husband was correct. This is the end of all of Krypton's inhabitants. In her last moments, Lara asks her son to create a better world than theirs. Thus, Lara and all the planet's inhabitants became history. Simultaneously, little Kal's ship arrives at planet Earth and falls rapidly, crashing in the state of Kansas. 33 years later, we see Kal working on a crab fishing boat. The boat receives a distress call from a burning oil platform. There's no way to evacuate the civilians. They're practically doomed. However, Kal arrives at the scene immediately and presents himself before the workers. He helps them evacuate to a rescue helicopter and when they're about to be crushed by a steel tower, he lunges to hold it up with all his strength. The civilians escape, and the entire platform collapses. Cal rests in the water unconscious. We now see Cal when he was a 9-year-old child. The name they gave him on Earth is Clark. He started developing superhuman abilities and could hear over great distances. He had X-ray vision, which prevented him from concentrating in class and scared him a lot. So, he runs out of the room and locks himself in a cleaning closet. His heat vision also manifested. They called his mother, and she came. Clark says the world is too big. His mother guides him to make it smaller and focus on her voice, imagining it's an island in the middle of the sea. With this resource, Clark managed to calm the shrill noises that afflicted him so much and came out to hug his mother. We return to the present, and Clark wakes up to the song of a whale and its calf. Another moment that would mark our protagonist occurs when he was a teenager and was on the school bus. A classmate was bullying him when suddenly the bus goes out of control and falls off the bridge. All the students will drown. However, Clark knew he could help them, so risking being discovered, he pushed the bus out of the water and even rescued the classmate who was bullying him. That classmate's mother visited Clark's adoptive parents, Jonathan and Martha Kent. This lady is convinced that what Clark did was a divine act, and the parents don't know how to respond. Jonathan goes to talk to his son and says they had an agreement. He can't risk being discovered. Clark responds that he couldn't let his classmates die. His father states that when the world discovers what he can do, everything will change. Their beliefs, their ideals about human beings, everything. Through tears, Clark asks his father if what that woman said is true, and if it was God who gave him these powers. Jonathan shows Clark the ship he arrived on Earth in. They thought the government would come looking for them, but years passed and it never happened. He also gives Clark the small key that Jor-El created. Jonathan took it for analysis, but discovered that the material it's made of doesn't even exist in the periodic table. Thus, the man reveals to his adoptive son that he's not from this planet. Jonathan states he understands how difficult this must be, but firmly believes he came to this world with a purpose. All these changes that now terrify him, perhaps he'll see them as blessings someday, and then he'll have to decide whether or not to show himself proudly before humanity. Jonathan loves Clark as if he were his blood, but out there he has a biological father who sent him to Earth for a reason, and he owes it to himself to discover what that reason was. We see that Clark continues wandering aimlessly and working as a waiter in a diner. A rude truck driver arrived who harassed the waitress, and Clark intervened. The truck driver doused him in beer and even threw a can at him. However, our protagonist simply walked away and chose peace. However, the truck driver would later discover that his truck was destroyed. In that diner, Clark heard soldiers talking about a military base in the middle of the Arctic, in Canadian territory, where something was discovered. A renowned journalist named Lois Lane arrives at this base. She's there to investigate the situation. Clark now works there as an assistant and meets Lois. The journalist is received by Colonel Hardy and a scientist. They show that their equipment discovered an enormous vehicle under the ice, and the strangest thing is that all the ice around it is over 18,000 years old. During the night, Lois goes out to photograph the surroundings, and in one of her captures, she discovers the assistant who carried her bags walking around dressed only in a shirt, which is strange because it's 30 degrees below zero. Lois follows him and discovers a recently melted ice tunnel made by our Kryptonian friend and his heat vision. Clark finally finds that vehicle. It's a huge spaceship. At the entrance, he notices a portal with the same shape as the key his adoptive father gave him, so he tries to place it. A drone tries to eliminate him, but Clark tries again and manages to enter. He sees a stranger walking through the ship and follows him. Clark walks around there fascinated by everything he discovers, like these capsules with corpses. However, Lois arrives with her camera and wants to photograph the alien drone. Clark runs to help her and destroys the drone easily. He adds that he can do things that others can't and takes the journalist's hand, applying a laser. Colonel Hardy and his team wake up in the midst of a strong tremor and watch as the enormous ship emerges from the ice and flies away at great speed. Lois was left on the ice safely and later wrote an article reporting everything about the ship and her alien savior, but her supervisor can't publish it. This is Perry, and he has a lot of respect for Lois, but he states that the Pentagon is denying everything and that he can't publish a story about aliens in the Daily Planet. However, this woman is determined, and since they didn't want to print her article, she leaks everything to a website administrator because she wants her savior to know that she knows the truth. Somewhere remote in the Arctic, we see that the enormous ship has landed. Clark meets with the mysterious man, who expresses his wish that Lara could have seen him become an adult. This gentleman introduces himself as Jor-El and tells Clark that he's his father, or at least his consciousness. Additionally, he reveals to our protagonist that his birth name is Kal-El. Jor-El informs his son that he comes from the planet Krypton. In an age of expansion, their race tried to find new worlds to colonize. This ship is one of the thousands that were launched into the vacuum of space. They built outposts on some worlds, and using heavy machinery, altered those worlds for the needs of the Kryptonian people. Their civilization flourished for thousands of years, but later they abandoned the outposts on other planets, and exhausted their natural resources. Krypton's core became unstable, and everything we saw at the beginning happened. Jor-El shows Clark the Genesis Chamber. In places like this, all Kryptonian babies were gestated. Each baby was born with a predetermined role in society. In other words, the child was born a laborer, engineer, or warrior. But what happened if a baby dreamed of being something different from what society had arranged for them? Lara and Jor-El decided to have the first natural birth in centuries, and bet everything on a baby who would be truly free. Clark asks why they didn't come with him, and his father explains that they, just like Zod, were products of Kryptonian society's failure and had to die with their planet. Clark states that he's alone then, but Jor-El says that now he's as much a son of Earth as a son of Krypton. He can embody the best of both worlds and be that dream his parents died preserving. Jor-El shows his son his house's symbol, which means hope. Clark can bring that hope to humanity. The hope that every living being has within themselves the potential to be a force for good. Then, the iconic red and blue suit is presented. Jor-El informs Clark that his powers are a product of the yellow sun's radiation, and he has become stronger than he could have anticipated. The only way to know how strong he is consists of testing his limits. Clark makes his first flight attempts and seems to be succeeding, although he later crashes spectacularly onto a mountain. Jor-El tells his son that he will give humans something to aspire to. They will try to imitate him, follow him, and stumble, but someday humanity will join him, and they'll achieve wonderful things together. These words accompany Kal-El's first successful flight in an emotional scene. We see our protagonist flying over the Arctic, Africa, the Grand Canyon, and the ocean. Meanwhile, Lois seems to have become obsessed with her mysterious savior, and tracks all his old jobs and false identities until she finds that classmate who bullied Clark when he was a child. He tells the story of the bus in the river, and the journalist finally finds our protagonist. Clark has been discovered, and Lois asks him to let her tell his story, because eventually everything will come to light, and someone else will discover his secret identity. Clark explains that his father feared people would reject him if they discovered the truth about him. We now see another crucial moment in Kal-El's life as Clark. He was complaining that they wouldn't let him show himself to the world, and that he didn't want to be a farmer all his life. He was telling Jonathan not to tell him how to live, because he wasn't his real father. Jonathan states they did their best effort to raise him, but perhaps that's no longer enough. Clark was about to apologize when a huge tornado breaks out, and Jonathan told Clark to guide everyone to a safe place while he helped the others. The situation got complicated because they had forgotten the dog in the pickup truck. So, the father had to go back, and couldn't escape. However, there were too many people watching for Clark to expose his powers, and his father signaled not to rescue him. Jonathan Kent preferred to give his life rather than see his son exposed, marginalized and persecuted by humanity, and he died valiantly. Clark tells Lois that his father was convinced the world wasn't ready to accept him yet, and he believed him. Clark arrives at Martha's house after being absent for a long time, and tells her emotionally that he discovered where he comes from, and who his biological parents are. The lady is very happy for him, but also fills with sadness, thinking that her beloved son could move away from her forever. Clark promises he's not going anywhere. The Arctic scientist discovered another spaceship circling Earth and informs General Swanwick. All of humanity watches this mysterious ship, including Clark. The aliens broadcast the same message worldwide. You are not alone. This happens through radio, television, computers, and other devices. The messenger introduces himself as General Zod and tells humanity that one of his own has been hiding on this planet for many years. He requests that Kal-El surrender in less than 24 hours, or otherwise, Earth will pay the price. The individual to whom Lois leaked her article gives statements on the internet stating that the journalist knows the alien's identity. Then Perry calls her and asks her to cooperate, please, and hand over her mystery man, because they're dealing with the fate of the entire planet. Lois tries to flee, but the FBI intercepts her. Clark remembers another episode from his adolescence when some bullies were mistreating him, and he had to suppress his anger and not act. Surprisingly, the classmate who used to bully him now treats him differently and offers him a helping hand. Clark tells Jonathan that he intensely wanted to hit that guy, and his father understands. However, what would that achieve? Would it make him feel better? Jonathan states that he must decide what kind of man he'll be when he grows up. Because good or bad, that man will change the whole world. Clark doesn't know if he should surrender or not, so he turns to a priest and tells him he's the alien they're looking for, asking for advice. The priest asks Clark what his instinct tells him, to which he responds that he can't trust Zod, but he also doesn't think he can trust humans. Before he leaves, the priest states that sometimes you need to take a leap of faith, and trust comes after. Determined, Clark surrenders to the United States military and tells General Swanwick that he'll cooperate only if they free journalist Lois Lane. She interviews Clark and they talk about the symbol on his chest. Clark states that in his world, this means hope. Lois, however, says that here it's an S, so she could give him a name that starts with S. She was about to say Superman, but the conversation is interrupted. The general asks Clark to reveal his civilian identity, because they only know him as the mysterious alien man. Clark clarifies that they can't control him, or much less harm him, but that he's not their enemy. General Zod, however, could be. Anyway, humanity is in danger, so Swanwick has orders to hand over our protagonist. The Kryptonians arrive, and before Clark appears Zod's right hand, Sub-Commander Faora. She states that her leader also requested this woman's presence and points to Lois, but Colonel Hardy intervenes, saying that's not possible, because she's one of theirs. However, Lois agrees to go with Faora to avoid unnecessary violence. Aboard a transport, Faora informs Lois that the Kryptonian ship's atmosphere isn't compatible with humans, so she'll have to wear a respirator. Discreetly, Clark hands his key to the journalist in case something goes wrong. Already in space, Clark meets General Zod, and both talk for a moment, but suddenly, Clark feels very weak and falls to the floor. Zod explains that he's rejecting the Kryptonian ship's atmosphere. Since he lived his whole life on Earth, his body isn't acclimated to this environment. Clark talks to Zod through a dream that simultaneously constitutes mind control. Zod explains how they got there. They were imprisoned and sent to the Phantom Zone, so when Krypton exploded, they were released from their freezing. They were condemned to wander aimlessly until they died of hunger. However, Zod and his men managed to convert the ship's projector into a hyperdrive, which got them out of the Phantom Zone. They wandered through space searching for the old Kryptonian outposts, but all were abandoned and their colonists dead. Zod and his men took the equipment and weapons they could, including a terraforming machine. For 33 years, they waited for their moment until they received a distress signal sent by Clark himself when he entered the ship in the Arctic. Without knowing it, our hero brought them there. The Codex contains the genetic information and predetermined roles of the Kryptonian race. Jor-El hid it in Clark's ship so that Krypton could be born again on planet Earth. Clark asks how this could be possible. We see that what Zod plans is to use this terraforming machine to annihilate all life on Earth and transform its environment into an ideal one for Kryptonians. Clark understands this means genocide and the extinction of humanity, and states he won't be part of this. As he sinks in a sea of skeletons, our hero awakens bound hand and foot. Zod confesses he murdered Jor-El, and that memory torments him. But if he had to do it again, he wouldn't hesitate because he has a duty to his people. One of Zod's scientists informs Clark that fighting is useless because this ship nullifies the powers he obtained from Earth's yellow sun. The scientist then collects samples of Clark's blood. Lois is escorted to a cell, but she notices there's a Kryptonian portal inside and remembers that Clark gave her his small key. After placing it and pressing it correctly, a projection of Jor-El appears before her. The gentleman tells her he's Clark's father and explains to the journalist that she's there thanks to the key. While they talk, he's loading himself into this ship's computer. Lois asks if she can help them, and Jor-El responds that he designed this ship and can alter its atmospheric system to give them an advantage. After such adjustment, Clark recovers his powers while the Kryptonians are suffering. Lois advances through the ship's corridors, and Jor-El helps her by closing doors, indicating where to shoot and guiding her to the escape pods. Jor-El remembers some things before saying goodbye. Lois was about to escape when this Kryptonian woman arrives to stop her, but she only manages to severely damage the pod. Clark sees Jor-El and asks if it's true that the Codex would be used to annihilate humans and terraform Earth. His father explains that he and Lara wanted their son to have the opportunity to be the bridge between two worlds and allow both races to coexist. Jor-El states that he must hurry because he can save Lois and save all of humanity. After a dramatic spacefall, Clark lands with Lois in his arms. The journalist informs him that they entered her mind to find out our hero's secret identity. He responds that it's okay and that they did the same to him. Meanwhile, Zod visits Martha and demands to know where the Codex is. The lady knows nothing about this. He searches inside the ship Clark arrived in, but it's not there either. Zod gets furious and intimidates the lady by throwing her pickup truck against the house. But rescue arrives. Clark, equally furious because no one threatens his mother, drags the general through the entire town until they reach a gas station. Zod's helmet is damaged, so he removes it but feels overwhelmed by his new powers. Just like when Clark got them, the sounds are excessively loud, and his X-ray vision prevents him from concentrating. Incapacitated, the general is forced to withdraw, while Farah and a large subordinate position themselves before Clark. They're extremely powerful, and since they still have their helmets, they don't suffer any real disadvantage. Colonel Hardy arrives, ordering them to use lethal force on all aliens. They launch a barrage of lead, which doesn't even scratch them. The large subordinate lunges at one of the helicopters and shatters the pilot, while Farah hits our hero so hard it sends him into an establishment, where Clark runs into the classmate who used to bully him. Faora continues dominating Clark and states that his sense of morality makes him weak. That's why, evolutionarily, they'll always win. The battle continues, and Hardy insists that the army attack all the Kryptonians until he sees how Clark saves one of his men. The colonel comes face to face with Faora and runs out of ammunition, so all he has left is to draw a knife. Faora does the same and says a quick death will be his reward, but Clark arrives to the rescue. Finally, he damaged Faora's helmet, and the woman promises to get revenge, but falls unconscious. The subordinate takes her back to the ship, and they escape the scene. The only one remaining is Clark, who finds himself surrounded by soldiers, but none attack him, because Colonel Hardy now knows this man isn't his enemy. Clark thanks him and flies away. He goes to his mother, and the lady says they're just material things. He tells Martha there's a way to make his race return. The problem is, they're not interested in sharing the planet with humans. Now Lois arrives and tells Clark she knows how to stop Zod. Speaking of the general, he returns to his ship when his scientist informs him they discovered the Codex. It was never inside Kal-El's ship, but inside his own cells. Zod now knows what he must do to restore Kryptonian glory. Since Clark doesn't need to be alive for them to extract the Codex from his blood, Zod doesn't need to restrain himself. He releases his terraforming machine, which splits into two parts. One falls into the Indian Ocean, while the other falls in the middle of Metropolis City. Swanwick and his team discover these artifacts are altering the planet to terraform it, so humanity is lost. Clark joins forces with Colonel Hardy. Thanks to Lois, they have a plan. This is the ship Clark arrived on Earth in. Jor-El explained to Lois that it works thanks to a device called a phantom drive, which bends space to transport itself. Zod's machine uses the same device. If they take this ship and drop it like a bomb on that machine, the collision of both phantom drives will create a black hole that in theory would suck in the evil Kryptonians. Swanwick approves their plan. while our hero heads to the Indian Ocean to finish off part of the terraforming machine. The problem is, this artifact has a very powerful gravitational field, and being from Krypton, it weakens Clark's powers. Additionally, it has a complex defense system that makes our hero's task extremely difficult. Meanwhile, the army launches missiles at the machine in Metropolis, but these are deflected and kill dozens of civilians. Zod goes to the Arctic, where he learns to concentrate and not need his helmet to be on Earth. He visits the scout ship and encounters his old rival. Jor-El states he won't allow him to use the Codex this way, but the villain revoked his control of the ship and is now eliminating him. Perry and all the Daily Planet workers evacuate amid all the alien chaos. Jor-El tells Zod that humans and Kryptonians can coexist, but the general states it would be too complicated to have to acclimate. Jor-El begs him to reconsider, because the Krypton he clings to so much no longer exists. Zod responds that he'll extract the Codex from Kal-El's corpse and use it to rebuild his planet, eliminating Jor-El's program. Amid the destruction, one of Perry's workers gets trapped in the rubble, and no matter how hard they try, they can't get her out. These brave communicators are about to die because of the terraforming machine. But in the middle of the Indian Ocean, Clark positions himself exactly underneath the artifact, where it seems the defense systems don't reach, and flies with all his strength upward, destroying this part of the machine, stopping the terraforming process. Perry and his friends are saved by a hair. Hardy and Lois state this was the signal to launch the ship at the terraforming device, and they approach the designated area. Lois places the key in the portal, but something's wrong. Again, it doesn't detect, and time is running out, because here comes Zod piloting the scout ship, aiming his weapons at Colonel Hardy's plane. However, Clark arrives to the rescue, destroying everything. The general says that if he destroys this ship where the Genesis chamber is located, he's killing Krypton. Clark responds that Krypton had its chance and uses his heat vision to destroy the ship completely. The scientist discovers the key wasn't making contact because the device was misaligned. Now it releases a large energy pulse that knocks the Doctor to the floor. Just then, Faora arrives to finish everyone off, so Hardy runs as fast as he can to the controls. The scientist with great difficulty returns with the key and presses it. Now it works. The payload is ready, and Faora eliminates the last of Hardy's men. However, this brave colonel takes the controls and repeats her own words back to her. "A good death is your reward." He crashes his plane into the terraforming machine and creates the singularity that absorbs all the Kryptonians. Earth has been saved thanks to Colonel Hardy. The ships, the machinery, everything completely disappears. Lois falls into the vacuum, but is rescued by Clark, and Metropolis can rest peacefully. Perry and his workers confirm it was this mysterious alien who saved them and watch as he and Lois share a kiss. However, the idyllic scene is interrupted by rubble moving, which Clark sets out to investigate. It's General Zod, who has been defeated and is alone. He tells Clark he chose humans over his own people. Zod was born with the sole purpose of protecting Krypton, and all his actions, however violent they were to protect his people. But now he no longer has a people. Clark took away his purpose, his soul. The general charges at our hero and states he's going to make all humans suffer. Clark rises and says he'll stop him because he's a monster. The Kryptonians begin a fierce battle, and in his rage, Zod discovers his heat vision and destroys everything around him. He still can't fly, but his attacks and clocks devastate entire buildings. Now Zod removes his armor and almost immediately learned to fly. There follows a scene of both fighting with blows in the air and combos. They take their fight to space, where Zod destroys an entire satellite and throws it at Clark. Both fall like a meteor back to Metropolis with satellite pieces. Clark and Zod fall into a subway station where the evil general is subdued. However, seeing a family of human civilians, he decides the moment for his revenge has come. Zod aims his heat vision at the family, and Clark begs him not to do this while trying to immobilize him. But Zod states he won't stop. With no other option, Clark is forced to break his neck, ending his thirst for revenge. General Zod falls dead. Before Lois, Clark cries out in pain. She hugs our hero and offers him comfort. Days later, Swanwick was calmly leaving his base when a $12 million drone crashes in front of him. The one responsible is none other than Superman. He tells the general not to try to find out where he lives, because he's not an enemy of the United States. Additionally, he requests that he help convince the people in Washington that he's not a threat to humanity. Clark and his mother visit Jonathan's grave. He states he wishes his father could see him finally become a hero, fighting for the people. Martha says her husband saw him. We see that good Jonathan Kent, ever since Clark was just a child playing at being a superhero, could recognize the great potential the boy possessed. Finally, Clark tells his mother he'll take a job that allows him to stay informed and enter dangerous places without arousing suspicion. We learn he got a job at the Daily Planet. Although Lois knows who he is, neither Perry nor the others know his secret identity. This marks the beginning of Clark Kent and Superman's dual identity.